Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for November 21st, 2022. Well, with the events last week involving the Ukrainian missile which killed 2 Polish civilians, it became clear to rational people that we were being pushed very close to World War III, possibly nuclear war with Russia. The line that was put out initially was intended to push that direction further. It was initially said that, quote, NATO member Poland was attacked by Russian missiles. This was a line that was put out in the initial press reports, including Associated Press, which quoted an unnamed U.S. intelligence source that said that it was a Russian missile which hit the site in Poland. It was in Poland on the border, near the border with Ukraine. But then the British press was filled with articles, Putin missiles hit Poland, emphasizing that Poland is a NATO member and that this should become the basis for invoking either Article 4 for consultation or Article 5 for action in case a member nation of NATO is attacked. Now, as this came out, the Associated Press later corrected it, quoting 3 intelligence officials who said, no, it wasn't a Russian missile. President Biden and the Polish president also made statements saying that they have no evidence to show that it was a Russian missile. But this didn't stop the press. This didn't stop the line that was coming out from people such as NATO General Secretary Stoltenberg. And of course, the most aggressive on this was President Zelensky, who insisted for more than 24 hours that it was a Russian missile. He said, I can confirm from our military sources that it was not a Ukrainian missile. And that was the story that was coming out. Now, the correction later included such statements as, well, it's still Russia's fault because of Russia's involvement in the war. It's still Putin. Putin's responsible for the death of Polish civilians. Now, the Ukrainian side was even more unhinged. The foreign minister Kuleba said that anyone saying it was a Ukrainian missile is pushing Russian propaganda. And there were calls for more weapons for Ukraine, including President Biden, who announced nearly $40 billion additional funding for weapons and aid to Ukraine in this war. The Lithuanian president, as part of the Baltic Warhawk faction, said the air defense should be extended to include Poland. And of course, the Ukrainians were saying you must extend the air defense over all of Ukraine, a no-fly zone, which so far saner heads have said is not acceptable because it will mean war. Well, we also discovered that the Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Defense, a retired General Havrilov, went to London and gave some interviews. Now, we don't know what he said in his private meetings, but what he said in his public meetings was straightforward. No peace talks with Russia until Russia leaves Crimea and all the territory they've taken in Ukraine. He said the decision has been made by Ukrainians, quote, that we are going up to the end, unquote. In other words, the line that NATO is going to fight Russia up to the last Ukrainian has been fully embraced by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. And then he said it's only a matter of time that Russia will be forced to leave, either illness or the death of Putin, regime change. And he said Crimea will possibly be retaken by December. Now, this is what was described by one analyst as a whiff of Hitler in the bunker, that as Germany was losing World War II, Hitler was pressing ahead, claiming that Germany was still winning the war. Now, making things worse is that the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry has made as Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Melnik, who recently was removed as the Ukrainian ambassador to Germany because of his open defense of Stefan Bandera, the World War II collaborator of the Nazis from the Ukrainian nationalist movement, so-called nationalist movement. He brought his forces into coordination with the Nazi SS, and there is extensive documentation of Bandera's forces involved in exterminating Jews, Poles, and Russians inside Ukraine. This is fully documented, and yet Melnik denied that Bandera had anything to do with the Nazis. So you bring someone like that into the foreign ministry in this situation, especially when Putin said one of the conditions of a peace talk is the removal of Nazis from Ukraine. And what you see is the fact that under NATO's direction, Ukraine does intend to fight to the last Ukrainian. Now, on the matter of the incomprehensible idiocy of the West, I bring you some statements from Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, who gave a speech at the Halifax International Security Forum. Austin is the one who said at the Ramstein Air Base conference last spring that the intent of the NATO operation was to weaken Russia. He didn't say it was for defense of Ukraine. He said it was to weaken Russia. And this has been stated by numerous US and NATO officials. Well, in commenting on the Polish incident, Austin said, Russia chose war. Russia chose aggression. But Ukraine chose to fight back. And Ukraine chose to defend itself. And the world came together to help. Now, he then went on to say something about the clear principles behind this. And listen to this. And when you realize how deluded these people are, he said, quote, these principles include that countries don't get to invade their peaceful neighbors. Well, what about the U.S. invading Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, sending forces and weapons into Syria? Then he went on to say, autocrats don't get to redraw borders by force. What about the Balkans? The 1990s assault against Serbia. And he said, and the imperial ambition of bullies doesn't outweigh the sovereign rights of UN member states. Well, what about the idea that the US is the sole superpower that issues the rules that define the order and will use military to back it up? Doesn't quite register for Austin, does it? And he went on to say, the tragic and troubling explosion in Poland this week reminded the whole world of the recklessness of Putin's war of choice. What about NATO's arming of Ukraine? Now, to counter this, we have some statements from Scott Ritter, the former UN weapons inspector, who insisted that there's no way that the Ukrainian missile could have been fired by accident. He's asserting that it appears to be a false flag designed to bring NATO into the war. And he called for a full investigation because he said, we have to be certain of this. Well, Ritter gave a presentation to a German video weekly called In the Eye of Big Brother. And in this one, he said things that need to be said and should be said by American leaders in the United States. But it's extremely important that this was said in Germany because Germany is paying the price for the NATO operations. And yet the Germans are remaining largely silent. So Ritter said the following. He was asked, what do you think about Germany's role with NATO in this war? And he said, fighting Russians is not so smart. How's that been working for Germany in the last century? You'll lose again. You have no troops on the ground to put on the ground. You think NATO has your back? Laughable. They have nothing for you but a march toward nuclear annihilation. Do you really want to die for NATO? He asked. He said, Germans, study your history. Back 30 to 40 years ago, Germans were smart to keep nuclear weapons off their land, referring to the mobilization by the German people to take missiles out of West Germany. And he said, you were also courageous enough to take to the streets. Now, Germans are sheep. Your politicians will sacrifice you for NATO. And he said that Germany's prosperity has been due to U.S. protection, U.S. trade, and cheap Russian gas. Germans work hard, sure, but without cheap Russian energy, German industry would not have happened. Germany must start reflecting on the reality of its situation. NATO and G7 are worthless. Germany, he concluded, can be great again, but not as a nation of sheep. I think these words are well chosen, sharp, necessarily so. And it's a message that should be heard not just in Germany, but throughout Europe. Now, we, the Schiller Institute, will be holding a conference tomorrow, November 22nd. You can register for it in the form at the bottom of the description page. This is a growing movement of officials, current and former officials, speaking out against the war threat. I urge you to register for it, share the link, get people to start speaking out. We need to take on those in power, such as Lloyd Austin, who are willing to not just fight to the last Ukrainian, but create a situation which could lead to the annihilation of all human lives on the planet. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow.